What if, after years of restraint, the United States finally decided that Russia's provocations had gone too far? Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the toll has been immense: hundreds of thousands of casualties, thousands of destroyed vehicles, and an economy strangled by sanctions. Yet instead of retreating, Moscow doubled down, using military drills, missile deployments, and nuclear rhetoric to intimidate NATO's eastern flank. The war in Ukraine revealed Russia's limits. Supply lines collapsed, morale faltered, and Western weapons blunted its advance. What was meant to be a quick victory turned into a grinding stalemate. Sanctions cut off access to high-tech components, forcing Russia to rely on outdated equipment and discounted energy exports to stay afloat. But battlefield setbacks only sharpened Moscow's threats, from cyber attacks on Europe to flights probing Baltic skies. For Washington, restraint had been deliberate. Billions in aid flowed to Kyiv, NATO's eastern defenses were reinforced, but direct strikes on Russia were avoided to prevent uncontrolled escalation. The risk, however, was clear. Unchecked, Russia might one day test NATO itself, perhaps through the vulnerable Baltic states, where geography offered Moscow tempting targets and the alliance its hardest test. By early 2025, the warnings became undeniable. Russian missile units in Kaliningrad launched hypersonic tests within range of NATO bases. State media portrayed them as proof of strength, but Western intelligence judged them as rehearsals for real strikes. Satellites tracked missile convoys, and intercepted communications revealed live-fire scenarios aimed at NATO command posts. The danger was immediate. Wait too long, and deterrence itself could crumble. At the point where patience runs out, and the United States must decide, continue to watch, and hope sanctions will bleed Moscow dry, or strike back directly to preserve NATO's credibility. A choice that would push the confrontation into a new and more dangerous phase. Once the threshold is crossed, events move quickly. The spark comes not with a grand announcement, but with a calculated show of force from Moscow. Russian missile brigades in Kaliningrad launch a salvo of hypersonic weapons toward the Baltic Sea, skimming dangerously close to NATO airspace. Though they land harmlessly in international waters, the symbolism is unmistakable. Russia is demonstrating both capability and intent. In the Kremlin's view, this is a warning shot meant to frighten the alliance, a signal that Moscow is still prepared to take risks that others will not. But in Washington, the message is received very differently. American intelligence assesses that the missiles were not a mere test, but a rehearsal for strikes on NATO targets. The Pentagon warns the White House that if these systems remain operational, they could overwhelm Baltic defenses in minutes. The choice is stark. Either allow Russia to establish a permanent threat corridor along NATO's northeastern flank, or act decisively to neutralize it. The United States, after days of consultations with European allies, authorizes a limited but direct strike. The mission is not to devastate Russia, nor to escalate toward Moscow itself, but to remove the most immediate danger. American F-35s take off from bases in Germany, supported by refueling aircraft and electronic warfare planes. At the same time, B-2 stealth bombers fly in from the continental United States, undetected until they reach their targets. Within hours, several key Russian missile batteries and radar installations in Kaliningrad are destroyed. The strikes are precise, but their political impact is seismic. For the first time since the Cold War, American weapons have directly hit Russian forces. Moscow reacts with fury. State television frames the attack as an act of aggression, insisting that Russia is the victim of Western hostility. Putin convenes his Security Council, declaring that NATO has crossed a red line. Russian air units scramble to intercept NATO patrols. Submarines are ordered into the Baltic and Arctic. Long-range bombers are put on alert. The crisis escalates on multiple fronts. Over the Baltic Sea, Russian and NATO fighters come dangerously close to combat. Several encounters involve locked radars and warning shots, but so far restraint holds. On the ground, Russian armored units move toward the borders of Estonia and Latvia, signaling the possibility of an incursion. NATO responds by mobilizing rapid reaction forces, airlifting American, British, and Polish troops into the Baltics. For the small towns near the frontier, it is the most visible sign of impending war since independence from the Soviet Union. In the Black Sea, Russia attempts to shift pressure southward. Its remaining naval assets, based in Sevastopol, sortie into contested waters. Cruise missiles are launched toward NATO surveillance drones and naval patrols. The United States responds with destroyers armed with Aegis missile defense systems, intercepting the incoming fire. Turkey, controlling the Bosporus, increases surveillance, quietly reminding Moscow that further escalation could see Russian naval movements constrained even more tightly. Meanwhile, in cyberspace, the conflict explodes. Russia unleashes a wave of coordinated attacks against European infrastructure. Power grids in Poland and Lithuania experience rolling blackouts. Banking systems in Germany and the Netherlands are disrupted. False alarms spread through social media, sowing panic about potential missile strikes. The goal is clear: to weaken public confidence, to make NATO populations question whether the cost of confrontation is worth it. Yet the effect is mixed. Governments respond by activating cyber defense units, isolating malicious code, and even conducting counterstrikes against Russian networks. The public, initially unnerved, rallies as leaders frame the attacks as proof of Moscow's desperation. The danger of escalation grows with each day. Russian generals urge stronger measures. Some propose deploying tactical nuclear weapons to Kaliningrad as a deterrent. Others suggest a limited ground incursion into the Baltics to restore deterrence. But every option carries risks. A nuclear demonstration could trigger a catastrophic cycle of retaliation. A ground offensive would face not only Baltic defenses, but the full weight of NATO reinforcements. Inside the Kremlin, the debate reflects the tension between rhetoric and reality. For years, Russia has claimed that it can withstand Western pressure. Yet now, under direct attack, its weaknesses are exposed. Replacement parts for advanced weapons are scarce. Aircraft availability is low. Ammunition stockpiles, already strained by years of war in Ukraine, dwindle further. Every escalation risks exposing vulnerabilities rather than masking them. For the United States, the challenge is different. Having acted decisively, Washington must now control the tempo of escalation. Too much restraint could embolden Moscow, but too much aggression could risk uncontrolled war. The president delivers a carefully worded address. The United States has no desire for a wider war, but it will defend NATO territory without hesitation. The message is aimed not only at Moscow, but at allies who need reassurance that America will not waver. NATO itself demonstrates unity in a way few expected. Germany, long hesitant to take aggressive stances, deploys additional aircraft to the Baltic. France increases naval patrols in the Mediterranean. Scandinavian nations, recently integrated into the alliance, provide early warning and air defense. What Russia hoped would fracture NATO instead strengthens it. The show of unity carries its own deterrent weight. Moscow now faces not just Washington, but a coalition of 32 nations acting in concert. And yet, even in this moment of clarity, the risk of miscalculation remains immense. A single clash in the skies, a single misinterpreted radar lock, could spiral out of control. Diplomats scramble behind the scenes, with Switzerland, Turkey, and even China offering to mediate. But neither side is ready to back down. For Moscow, retreat would be humiliation. For Washington, hesitation would be weakness. This is the essence of escalation, a contest of resolve layered upon a contest of capability. Russia still possesses vast nuclear forces, but they are weapons of last resort. The United States, leading NATO, possesses overwhelming conventional strength, but must avoid triggering nuclear thresholds. Both sides maneuver carefully yet aggressively, seeking advantage without crossing the point of no return. By the end of this phase, the lines are drawn more sharply than ever. Russia has demonstrated that it is willing to risk confrontation to project strength. The United States has shown that it will not allow intimidation of its allies to go unanswered. NATO stands united, reinforcing its eastern flank. The world watches nervously, aware that the next stage, whether restraint or further escalation, could decide the future of European security. Once the first exchange of blows fades, the confrontation settles into a tense stalemate. Neither side seeks all-out war, yet neither can afford to back down. For Russia, retreat would be humiliation. For the United States and NATO, hesitation would destroy the credibility of deterrence. The result is a prolonged contest of endurance, stretching across military, cyber, economic, and political fronts. On the battlefield, the skies over the Baltics remain the most volatile. Russian jets fly patrols daily, but shortages of spare parts and fuel limit their range. NATO, rotating aircraft from multiple countries, maintains near constant coverage. Electronic warfare fills the airwaves, jamming, spoofing, radar locks that stop just short of missile launches. A single miscalculation could trigger catastrophe, yet both sides exercise discipline. The dogfights are about presence, not destruction. At sea, the confrontation spreads north and south. In the Arctic, Russian submarines patrol under the ice, hoping to threaten NATO supply lines. Yet American and Norwegian sonar networks detect most movements, shadowing them silently. In the Black Sea, Russian warships venture out from Sevastopol, but NATO surveillance drones track them closely. Cruise missiles are readied, yet rarely fired. The message on both sides is the same. We are here, we are ready, and we will not yield. Cyber warfare intensifies into the largest campaign in modern history. Russia targets energy grids, hospitals, financial networks, even water treatment facilities. Power outages ripple through Eastern Europe. Banks in Germany temporarily suspend online services. False alarms spread on social media about incoming missile strikes. But NATO's cyber defense units adapt quickly. Malicious code is isolated, backup systems restore essential functions, and counterstrikes disable Russian command servers. The public, initially rattled, grows hardened. What once would have spread panic now stiffens resolve. Russia's cyber arsenal, meant to sow division, instead exposes its own reliance on disruption rather than strength. The economic front becomes equally decisive. Energy prices spike, causing global markets to reel. Europe accelerates its shift to American and Middle Eastern liquefied gas, while Russia, cut off from its most profitable customers, sells oil at steep discounts to Asia. Inflation rises in Moscow, stores empty of basic goods, and the ruble weakens. Meanwhile, NATO economies, though strained, absorb the shock. Factories in the US shift to war production, echoing the mobilization of past conflicts. Allies coordinate to stabilize food and energy flows, preventing global collapse. For Russia, every month of confrontation drains resources it cannot replace. International reactions shape the strategic picture. China, cautious not to be seen as enabling reckless escalation, calls publicly for restraint while privately urging Moscow to avoid nuclear threats. India, long careful to balance ties, leans subtly toward the West, expanding defense cooperation with Washington. Nations in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, watching closely, conclude that Russia is isolated while the United States leads a resilient coalition. The confrontation, rather than dividing the world, reinforces American influence. Inside Russia, the political cost deepens. Funerals multiply, not only for soldiers in Ukraine, but now for pilots and sailors lost against NATO. State media proclaims victories, but images of destroyed bases and smoldering vehicles leak through social media. Economic hardship spreads. Factories close, wages shrink, inflation erodes savings. The Kremlin tightens repression, but even fear cannot mask fatigue. The population begins to question whether confrontation with NATO serves Russia's survival or only the pride of its leaders. In the United States, debates persist. Critics warn of nuclear danger, of overextension, of repeating the mistakes of past interventions. Yet intelligence reports showing Russia's mounting losses and NATO's growing unity tilt the balance. The president frames the conflict not as America's war, but as the defense of a security order built since 1945. Public opinion, initially wary, rallies around the need to prevent aggression from dictating Europe's future. The message is clear. America does not seek conquest, but it will not abandon allies. As weeks turn into months, the confrontation becomes a test of patience. Russia cannot escalate without risking catastrophe and cannot retreat without losing face. NATO sustains pressure without overstepping. The balance favors the alliance, yet the outcome remains uncertain. It is here in the grinding contest of CAM-Q that the final shape of the conflict is decided. The end does not come with a single dramatic battle, but with the slow accumulation of pressure. Russia, stretched thin, finds its options shrinking. Ammunition stockpiles run low. Advanced weapons cannot be replaced. Sanctions bite deeper, leaving shelves bare and industries idle. Casualties climb, not in the thousands, but in the tens of thousands. The promise of quick victory, repeated for years, now rings hollow even among loyal citizens. The Kremlin seeks a way out. Diplomatic channels once dormant come alive. Turkey offers mediation. China, eager to avoid global instability, signals willingness to broker talks. The narrative from Moscow shifts subtly. Instead of conquest or intimidation, the rhetoric emphasizes defense, survival, and the need for stability. A ceasefire is proposed, framed as a Russian success in deterring NATO aggression. The reality, however, is clearer to the world. Russia has failed to fracture the alliance, failed to intimidate its neighbors, and failed to impose its will. For NATO and the United States, the outcome is measured. There is no triumphant march, no declaration of victory. Instead, Washington emphasizes the preservation of collective security. The Baltics remain intact, Ukraine continues to resist with renewed confidence, and NATO emerges more united than at any time in decades. America's message is simple. Deterrence works when resolve is demonstrated. The global implications are profound. China recalculates its ambitions, wary of underestimating American alliances. Nations in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa see once again the value of U.S. partnerships. The myth of Western decline is punctured, replaced by a recognition that collective defense remains credible. Russia, though not destroyed, is weakened, isolated, and forced to adapt to diminished influence. Inside Russia, the reckoning is harsher. Economic decline accelerates. Political repression intensifies, but legitimacy erodes. Elites question the wisdom of prolonged confrontation. Citizens tired of sacrifice demand stability. The Kremlin survives but diminished, presiding over a country more fragile than ever before. The very act of trying to project power has left Russia weaker, less secure, and more dependent on reluctant partners. For the United States, the conclusion reinforces a long-standing truth. Strength is not measured only by weapons, but by alliances, resilience, and legitimacy. By acting with caution yet firmness, Washington avoids uncontrolled escalation while ensuring that NATO's credibility remains intact. The victory is not flashy, but strategic. Russia's gambit fails, NATO stands firm, and the balance of power in Europe is reaffirmed. Not a story of conquest, but of deterrence. Not a collapse, but a reckoning. Russia pushed beyond its limits, believing that threats and intimidation could replace strength. The United States, after years of restraint, chose to draw the line. And in the end, the lesson for the world is unmistakable. Aggression may disrupt, but it cannot endure against a coalition bound by resolve.